Good day, viewers. Welcome to yet another fun-filled and exciting episode of your favorite show. That is, of course, The Social League. I am Hanchuka Pofi, and I will be the moderator for today's discussion. Now, I must say, it is great to be back with Season 3 of The Social League. I mean, it's Season 3 and we're still going strong. But before we head into today's discussion, let's head over to the marketplace. Well, today's topic in studio is same-sex marriages, and I must say I'm joined by two very amazing guests, but I'm going to let them introduce themselves for you guys today. All right, thank you guys so much for joining us today. Could you please introduce yourselves for our guests? And for our viewers, sorry.
Hi, I'm Carlies Kikkerling. I'm a legal practitioner or lawyer. I practice in Namibia, and I've been dealing with a few of the court cases that's been going on relating to same-sex marriages and the recognition thereof.
Yes.
Hi, good morning. My name is Philip Lühl, and I'm an architect and a lecturer at the Namibia University of Science and Technology. And I am in a same-sex marriage, though not acknowledged in this country, and have been dealing with quite a number of issues surrounding that status as a Namibian citizen with a non-Namibian partner.
Right, so thank you so much for joining us today. Right, so to kickstart today's discussion, I'd like to find out from you guys just the definition of marriage. Let's start off with the definition of marriage.
I guess that would be me.
Yeah.
So a marriage is considered a legal or formal union that is recognized legally and is regulated by certain rules and legislation and customs as well. And in Namibia, and I guess in most parts of the world, it's still considered to be between a man and a woman, although there are many countries where we've moved past that and civil unions are just between spouses or partners, whether it's opposite sex or same-sex unions.
All right, so speaking about same-sex marriages now, so many people regard same-sex marriages and heterosexual marriages as different, or I want to find out, what is your opinion on that? What do you think? Do you think there is like a specific difference other than the obvious?
Well, perhaps I can speak from experience. Of course, I have not been in a opposite-sex marriage before, but I really think the issues are exactly the same. You know, it's essentially you agree to live together, to support each other, to create, a sort of situation of care for children to grow up, to really realize your ambitions and life dreams, together with the support of another person. And, whether that person is of the same sex or of the opposite sex, it really does not actually alter the sort of dynamics that play out, out between any two people in a relationship.
Yes, I think you must remember the legal framework is exactly the same. The legal consequences, the legal protection, the legal implications are exactly the same for a same-sex marriage as for an opposite-sex marriage. It's almost like asking couple A and couple B, how do your marriages differ? Whether you're both in opposite-sex marriages, it's the same implication. Each marriage has its own dynamic, its own personal issues and things, but at the end of the day, it's still just a couple moving through the world, living a life together and building a future.
And perhaps, again, to add to that is, in Namibia, I think, in our case, all institutions besides the Ministry of Home Affairs acknowledges my partner as my husband, right? So my sort of pension fund, my employer, my medical aid, like our banks, we're co-signatories, we have joint bank accounts. everybody just simply acknowledges that we're, you know, a household, a family. Of course, you know, our kids' school, their doctors, you know, hospitals, everybody.
Yeah.
Besides the Ministry of Home Affairs, that acknowledges that we are, you know, really a family unit and operate as such.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think our civilization is almost ahead of our legislation in the country with
Yeah.
that. Most people don't. Well, that's been my experience, and looking at the support that's been given to the court cases, and for Philip and for my clients, it's been amazing. Obviously, you have the negative comments and the negative, you know, more religious, zealous, and people like that. But
Yeah.
it's like Philip says, in most arenas of our civilization, it's not an issue. People get recognized. They are treated with dignity and respect. It's just when it comes to our legislation, and specifically where it's enforced
Yeah.
by Home Affairs, and I'm sure by other ministries also, that we experience this kind of tug of war
Yeah.
or resistance.
Yeah, very important points that you've mentioned there. I think a lot of institutions have recognized it. It's just a little bit with the legislation that is way behind there. And I think we've had so many same-sex relationships in our country where people have been complaining, for example, about violence that is happening within the relationship. And when they go and report it to the police, they are not being assisted because they're like, this is same-sex, and they are not assisted in that regard. What do you then have to say about that?
Well, I think Kali can probably speak to this more, but I think the shocking thing is that in the current discussion around is it the Domestic Violence, Preventing of Domestic Violence Act, the reference to partnerships was specifically made to be partners of opposite sex. So there's like an active attempt to to sort of bracket out same-sex relationships from the protections against domestic violence, which is entirely outrageous, right? I mean, so I think that really means that the government can no longer stand on the stance to say, oh, we're not actively persecuting or discriminating against same-sex or LGBTQ people, because here we are drafting a law in 2022 where we're actively discriminating against a subsection of the population, which is totally unacceptable under our constitution.
You're completely right, and that is, I think, the basis of our court cases that I'm involved in. That we received the judgment on 20 January now. I'm not sure whether everyone is aware of this, but although it was a technical loss for us, the judgment is completely in our favor, and the court felt it was being held back by an old court case of 2001 that it requires us to approach the Supreme Court, which we have now done. And we are hoping to have get a date in this year still to argue the matter in the Supreme Court. But for us, it's the basic, one of the legs that we on which our case is founded is the interpretation of the words spouse and family, as enshrined in our Constitution in Article 4 and Article 10. And which really, it hammers on the fact that it must include spouse and partner, a family. It must make provision for same-sex marriages. We can't act like the LGBTQI community is not part of the country.
Yeah.
And if in our constitution does, where it maybe lacks in providing the protection that the South African Constitution does, with not referring specifically to sexual orientation, and only referring to sex. The reality is Namibia has ratified so many international conventions that provides for the protection of human rights, and that specifically enshrines protection against discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, that our government can no longer sit on their hands or turn a blind eye to this. It has to make provision and as you've stated, the problem is it comes from the top.
Yeah.
If we are dealing with ministers comparing homosexuality to Satanism in publications, I mean, that just sends such an incredibly dismissive and wrong,
Impression.
interpretation of it. And luckily, our president has, in the last few months, come out quite strongly vocally and made reference to the rights of the LGBTQI community, and that there should be, some protection afforded to that part of our community.
Right, such an amazing discussion that we're having here in studio. I mean, violence is violence, rights are rights, and that is something that we need to head towards as a country, especially for the people that are seated at the top right now. We'll be back after this short break with more. If you're just joining us, you are watching The Social League, which is your favorite panel discussion show. I'm, of course, Hanchuka Pofi, and I am the moderator for today's discussion. Now, before the break, we're speaking a little bit about same-sex marriages, and I want to find out from you, what do you think our Namibian government can now do to make our same-sex couples feel more included within the country?
Well, to begin with, I would simply say to start or to continue with the process that I believe is now in Parliament to review outdated laws.
Yeah.
There are sort of pre-independence laws that were in fact colonial laws, outlawing, for example, consensual sex between men, which has no place in my mind in a free and democratic Namibia. But there is more to do than that. I mean, so obviously old laws must be repealed. But also there is the need to really expand the sort of definitions of family and partnerships, because what do we really care about, right? We care about building a caring and loving society, right, where everybody can find a place, where children can grow up with the protection of their families. I have 3 children. They're like 3 and 2 and 1 year old, and they grow up in an extremely loving household. They have so many family and friends that literally. Sort of a village that cares for them. And our government is not considering them as our children or as my children. They're questioning our parentage. They're questioning their right to citizenship by descent. They're questioning, wanting DNA proof that has to prove that I'm biologically linked to my child in order for me to be a parent. Now, if we would do that with each and every person in this country, we would find so many surprises that what are parents really? Is it only a biological link that sort of determines your parentage, or the actual fact that you're providing a caring environment for a child to grow up? So I think there's really a lot that needs to be done, both in terms of the law, but also more actively encouraging more tolerance and inclusion in the society, and that I would assume starts with high school kids. I mean, the whole discussion around sexual education in the, I don't know what the curriculum is, but there's a whole discussion around if LGBTQ issues should be included in discussions around sexual education and so on. It starts from that level all the way through, policy and law, in my mind.
I agree with Philip 100%. The reality is, it'll have to come from the top. Firstly, we'll have to look at legislation, and it is our courts and as well as our parliament's duties to expand our laws to be inclusive. I mean, we've got articles in our constitution providing for the right to equality and not to be discriminated against. You have the right to family, you have the right to dignity, which is enshrined in our constitution, and you cannot cherry pick the constitutional rights that you want to give to your citizens.
Yeah.
If one is if a right is afforded to your country and it's your population, every single person should enjoy the same rights. And it should come from the top where our government should start actively promoting, saying we will not indulge discrimination of any kind against any members of our population. The police should be ordered to take steps, active steps in protecting same-sex violence against same-sex domestic couples. That should be enforced from the top. And I believe when that becomes clear to the public, I think discrimination and violence will go down.
Very, very important points that you've mentioned there, especially starting with the school curriculum, having these within the school curriculum to educate the Namibian child, because I think the children are the future, and that's where we start with the education system, because many times it's also very difficult to change the minds of our elders, especially with the people that are in parliament today. It's so difficult to just get the message out to them. All right, my next question for you guys is, where do you see the country in the next 5 years when it comes to same-sex marriages? Do we see it headed for positivity, or only time will tell?
I think if Philip may differ from me, there have been so many court cases in the last 3-4 years relating to LGBTQI rights that, and it's after about a silence of 18 years, where everyone was too afraid after the Frank judgment in 2001 to do anything, when our constitutional court, made quite derogatory remarks relating to the homosexuality of the couple involved. And I think, to me, that's kind of the turning point. The law has to change. It's changed worldwide, the movement internationally. I mean, we're looking at South Africa, who's already legalized same-sex marriages since 2006. It took quite a while, but since about 2015, there's been a worldwide change in the United States, which, Australia. A lot of countries finally catching up with the intention of what human rights and the protection of human rights should be afforded. So, although we've been a little bit disappointed with some of the judgments that's been coming forth, I would choose to remain hopeful, and then to say that in 5 years we may not be at the point where we will legalize same-sex marriages, but that we are extremely hopeful that we will at least be at a point where we will recognize same-sex marriages concluded between foreigners or between Namibians and a foreign spouse.
I think in my view, you made reference to the elders. Somebody once told us, a good friend, he said, we're our ancestors' wildest dreams. And I think we have to recognize that, the same elders that we now are, fighting against are the same elders that, that gave us the Constitution. And this is an incredible document. I mean, it really speaks about what we envision to be as a country: free, equal, and all these values that we're building towards. And this was, some of the people today in government, drafted that document. And so, I think we're just, furthering their project, really, which is also our project, right? And I think so. I think we are moving forward. We're definitely moving forward. Also regionally, Botswana, repealed sodomy in just a few weeks ago or months ago. I think Mozambique and Angola simply scrapped it from their penal codes. So there's, also countries in the region are moving forward to say, why are we fighting over issues that are of personal nature? While we have so many real issues to deal with in terms of furthering equality. Because for me, that's one of the huge issues, is that, yes, we have court cases and so on, but really the resources, especially financial resources, that it takes to be able to afford to take this matter to court, right? While indeed it should be Parliament that should be expanding our rights based on the Constitution, 30 years ago. And so yes, we have a sound judicial system, but it is extremely, inaccessible, if I can use that word, if you don't have the financial resources. And so, that in itself means that, in my personal case, have the resources and the ability to, to challenge this through our legal system. But of course, the vast majority of this country does not have that opportunity, and so in that case, you're just, left to wait and see. And I think that is really, if we live in a country where only those with, the financial background to be able to challenge these things can do so, whereas others don't have, the same sort of access, I think then it becomes really, really, really problematic. And so, I do think, or I do see ourselves also moving forward, but unfortunately it does take a lot of effort from a lot of sides. But one last thing that I wanted to mention, in addition to the court cases, I think we've also seen finally over the past year, an immense upsurge of visibility of the LGBTQ community. So there's been pride marches, there are regular events, not only in Windhoek, also in smaller towns around the country. Visibility at the university. We now have an active LGBTQ student community that didn't exist in that form before. So there's really, I think, a sort of awakening, and of course it has a lot to do with the generational change that is quite broad and that goes beyond just the legal challenges, but really to also to cultural and sort of social visibility, and I think that's where it becomes extremely encouraging for me, because that's where we see our society moving forward, not just our sort of regulatory systems.
Well said, well said. Thank you so much for joining us today. But before I let you go, do you have any final comments?
I think from my side, I think the most important thing is that we have to realize that Namibia is a democratic country. It's not a religious state. We are protected by our constitution, which provides for equality, dignity to be afforded to every citizen, and that at the end of the day, like Philip said, it's a private matter. It does not concern anyone what happens behind the closed doors of a couple, and those rights and freedoms should be afforded to every single person in this country. That I think it's time that we realize that we've got much bigger fish to fry. We've got much bigger issues to address at this point in time, with wars going on in Europe and financial crises crippling basically the entire world. That should be our focus, and not two people loving each other that's different from what you're used to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, from a very personal experience, I have this sort of strange situation where, on the one hand, I'm working closely with government, specifically in the areas where I have my expertise in terms of housing and informal settlement upgrading, so urban development issues. I'm working with one arm of government very closely, supporting, and then another arm of government is sort of chopping my legs. I mean, my family was separated twice for weeks and months on end. Well, again, we already had kids. Last year it was about 2 months that we couldn't be together after the birth of our twins. A year before that, it was about 3 weeks that my husband was sort of unprocedurally kicked out of the country. And so, I can simply not be in this country, and certainly he cannot be in this country, just, freely contributing to the development of this place. And so that's absurd. It's totally absurd. And it has put us, already once in a situation of me essentially having to move into exile simply because I cannot live here with my family in peace in this country that I was born in. And now, after a very disappointing Supreme Court judgment the other day, we're, back to square one, and we're basically again, having to consider, like, how does my husband get, residence rights in this country, if not by virtue of our marriage? How does that get acknowledged? And if not, then do we have to move away to another country as a family simply because we cannot be together as a family? Now that, in my mind, is, the word is exile. And that word, I think, was last spoken, before independence, where people had to go into exile because they simply couldn't be in this country. So I think it is quite serious, and, people sort of come with issues like, oh yeah, you see it's, the kind of white people's issues or whatever else, or rich people's concerns. Is like, no, this is a very fundamental concern. Like, can or can I not live in this country, you know, as a free person. And I think that's for me what it boils down to, and that what it makes so, you know, so like fundamental to achieving our sort of social, you know, aims that are enshrined in the Constitution.
Right. Once again, thank you so much for joining us for today's discussion. Right, that was, of course, Season 3, Episode 1 of The Social League. Such an amazing discussion that we had here on same-sex marriages. I've definitely learned a whole lot, and I hope you did too. From us here at the studio, it is, of course, goodbye.